Welcome to With Love, Misty. Welcome to my channel. I'm the host, Misty. Here I come in love with love. I'm your love dealer. Love is my superpower. Here on my channel, I in the past I've held space for you. I've offered ways to tap into your superpower, all of these things. Most recently, I read Vibrate Higher by Layla Delia. I just finished it. There's a playlist up so you can catch up on that. Um, my mission right now is to literally vibrate higher daily, to live at my highest vibration, to heal the things that I don't talk about. We don't talk about. I think we all have something in our lives that we go through, um, or that stick with us and that we can't shake. But how do we defy that, and how do we still operate in our greatness? And recently, after um, losing my mother, really, I don't know if anyone's lost their parent, period, but their mother, it does something to you. And they say pain changes you, and I want to turn my pain into some kind of purpose. I've been reading these books. I'm actually going to start. This will be episode 1 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I'll get into that in just a second. But I am in search of anything that will help me stretch, that will help me defy just giving in to the pain and not transcending it. And I always hashtag with many of the losses with my sister, and just the hashtag tragedy to triumph, pain to purpose. I know there's all these little names and isms and stuff going on, but this is raw, uncut, unedited. Even me reading these books are me reading them for myself, because I am determined to live in my power, to stand in my power and live in my greatness. And I listened to David Goggins, and his story is incredible. You can find his videos on YouTube and see the intensity in which he really, really tells you how he defied the odds and how he overcame. As we read the book, you'll see he's very, very raw, uncut. This is by no way he it's definitely an explicit book. He's explicit and very, when I say explicit, meaning that he has to describe things. My mouth is crazy as it is. You know, hey, I'm a little unapologetic about it. So is he. But at the end of the day, the message is beautiful here. So me choosing to read this book is a desperate attempt to really walk in alignment with my greatness, to really truly be aligned with my greatness. And I felt like David Goggins, a Navy SEAL person, and when you hear him talk and his mental, like if I can get in that mental frame of mind and stay there, there's no stopping me, because I do work hard. I work against the grain. I work hard. I expect a lot out of myself, but I also sacrifice a lot of myself for others. And I'm at a point where this is another rebirth for me. This is a time for me to evolve into the next level of me. And putting myself first is very important. But how can I become, as he says, how can I get a calloused mind and become so disciplined that I lock in and greatness is all I see? I don't let anything veer me off the path. So, Can't Hurt Me. It says this is his book right here. Can't Hurt Me. Master Your Mind and Defy the Odds. David Goggins, New York Times bestseller. I chose this, like I said, because it's extreme. And right now, it's life or death. It's life or death. I'm like a beautiful corpse walking. My sister was like, "You look like a beautiful dead doll." And I'm like, well, this is my 100th rebirth. So There's spiritual deaths. There's a phoenix process. We reconfigure we reimagine ourselves, reconfigure. There's nirvana. It is okay to die to our old selves to become who we are meant to be. And Layla Delia says that in her book as well. Um, this is definitely a shift from that book. So, um, without warning and further ado, I'm going to start episode 1 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. To the unrelenting voice in my head that will never allow me to stop. Warning order. Time zone 24/7. Task organization, solo mission. Number 1, situation. You are in danger of living a life so comfortable and soft that you will die without ever realizing your true potential. Number 2, mission. To unshackle your mind, ditch the victim's mentality forever, own all aspects of your life completely, build an unbreakable foundation. 3, execution. A, read this cover to cover, study the techniques within, accept all 10 challenges, repeat. Repetition will callous your mind. B, if you do your job to the best of your ability, this will hurt. This mission is not about making yourself feel better. This mission is about being better and having a greater impact on the world. Don't stop when you're tired. Stop when you're done. 4, classified. This is the origin story of a hero. The hero is you. By command of David Goggins, signed David Goggins. Rank and service, Chief U.S. Navy SEALs. He's retired. Introduction. Do you know who you really are and what you're capable of? I'm sure you think so, but just because you believe something doesn't make it true. Denial is the ultimate comfort zone. Don't worry, you're not alone. You aren't alone. In every town, in every country, all over the world, millions roam the streets, dead-eyed as zombies, addicted to comfort, embracing a victim's mentality and unaware of their true potential. I know this because I meet and hear from them all the time. And because, just like you, I used to be one of them. I had damn good excuses too. Life dealt me a bad hand. I was born broken, grew up with beatdowns, was tormented in school, was called nigger more times than I could count. We were once poor, surviving on welfare, living in government subsidized housing, and my depression was smothering. I lived life at the bottom of the barrel, and my future forecast was bleak as fuck. Very few people know how the bottom feels, but I do. It's like quicksand. It grabs you, sucks you under, and won't let you go. When life is like that, it's easy to drift and continue to make the same comfortable choices that are killing you over and over again. But the truth is, we all make habitual self-limiting choices. It's as natural as a sunset and as fundamental as gravity. It's how our brains are wired, which is why motivation is crap. Even the best pep talk or self-help hack is nothing but a temporary fix. It won't rewire your brain. It won't amplify your voice or uplift your life. Motivation changes exactly nobody. The bad hand that was my life was mine, and mine alone to fix. So I sought out pain, fell in love with suffering, and eventually transformed myself from the weakest piece of shit on the planet into the hardest man God ever created. Or so I tell myself. Odds are you had a much better childhood than I did, and even now might might have a damn decent life. But no matter who you are, who your parents are or were, where you live, what you do for a living, or how much money you have, you're probably living at about 40% of your true capability. Damn shame. We all have the potential to be so much more. Years ago, I was invited to be on a panel at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I'd never set foot in a university lecture hall as a student. I'd barely graduated high school, yet I was at one of the most prestigious institutions in the country to discuss mental toughness with a handful of others. At some point in the discussion, an esteemed MIT professor said that we each have genetic limitations, hard ceilings. That hard ceilings, that there are some things we just can't do no matter how mentally tough we are. When we hit our genetic ceiling, he said, mental toughness doesn't enter into the question. Everyone in that room seemed to accept his version of reality because this senior tenured professor was known for researching mental toughness. It was his life's work. It was also a bunch of bullshit to me. It was also a bunch of bullshit. And to me, he was using science to let us all off the hook. I'd been quiet until then because I was surrounded by all these smart people, feeling stupid, but someone in the audience noticed the look on my face and asked if I agreed. And if you ask me a direct question, I won't be shy. There's something to be said for living it instead of studying it, I said, then turned toward the professor. What you said is true for most people, but not 100%. There will always be the 1% of us who are willing to put in the work to defy the odds. I went on to explain what I knew from experience, that anybody can become a totally different person and achieve what so-called experts like him claim is impossible. But it takes a lot of heart, will, and an armored mind. Heraclitus, I think that's proper saying of that. I will have to look that up. Heraclitus, a philosopher born in the Persian Empire back in the 5th century BC, had it right when he wrote about men on the battlefield. Out of every 100 men, he wrote, 10 shouldn't even be there. 80 are just targets, 9 are the real fighters, and we are lucky to have them, for they make the battle. But the one is a warrior. From the time you take your first breath, you become eligible to die. You also become eligible to find your greatness and become the one warrior. But it's up to you to equip yourself for the battle ahead. But it's up to you to equip yourself for the battle ahead. Only you can master your mind, which is what it takes to live a life, what it takes to live a bold life filled with accomplishments most people consider beyond their capability. I'm not a genius like most professors at MIT, but I am that one warrior. And the story you are about to read, the story of my fucked up life, will illuminate a proven path to self mastery and empower you to face reality. Hold yourself accountable, push past pain, learn to love what you fear, relish failure, live to your fullest potential, and find out who you really are. Human beings change through study, habit, and stories. Through my story, you will learn what the body and mind are capable of when they're driven to maximum capacity and how to get there. Because when you're driven, whatever is in front of you, whether it's racism, sexism, injuries, divorce, depression, obesity, tragedy, or poverty, becomes fuel for your metamorphosis. The steps laid out here amount to the evolutionary algorithm, one that obliterates barriers, glimmers with glory, and delivers lasting peace. I hope you're ready. It's time to go to war with yourself. Chapter 1. I should have been a statistic. We found hell in a beautiful neighborhood in 1981. Williamsville offered the tastiest real estate in Buffalo, New York. Leafy and friendly, its safe streets were dotted with dainty homes filled with model citizens, doctors, attorneys, and steel plant executives. Dentists and professional football players lived there with their adoring wives and their 2.2 kids. Cars were new, roads swept, possibilities endless. We're talking about a living, breathing American dream. Hell was a corner lot on the Paradise Road. Hell was a corner lot on Paradise Road. That's where we lived, in a two-story, four-bedroom, white wooden home with four square pillars framing a front porch that led to the widest, greenest lawn in Williamsville. We had a vegetable garden out back and two-car garage stocked with a 1962 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, a 1980 Mercedes 450 SLC, and in the driveway, a sparkling new 1981 black Corvette. Everyone on Paradise Road lived near the top of the food chain, and based on appearances, most of our neighbors thought we were the so called happy, well adjusted Goggins family. Thought we were top of the spear, but that was just the tip of the spear. Well adjusted Goggins family were just the tip of the spear, but glossy surfaces reflect much more than they reveal. They'd see us most weekday mornings gathered in the driveway at 7 a.m. My dad, Trunis Goggins, wasn't tall, but he was handsome and built like a boxer. He wore tailored suits, his smile warm and open. He looked every bit the successful businessman on his way to work. My mother, Jackie, was 17 years younger, slender and beautiful, and my brother and I were clean cut, well dressed in jeans and pastel Izod shirts and strapped with backpacks just like the other kids. The white kids, just like, let me go back. My mother, Jackie, was 17 years younger, slender and beautiful, and my brother and I were clean cut, well dressed. My brother and I were clean cut, well dressed in jeans and pastel Izod shirts and strapped with backpacks, just like the other kids, the white kids. In our versions of in our version of affluent America, each driveway was a staging ground for nods and waves before parents and children rode off to work and school. Neighbors saw what they wanted. Nobody probed too deep. Good thing. The truth was, the Goggins family had just returned home from another all-nighter in the hood. And if Paradise Road was hell, that meant I lived with the devil himself. As soon as our neighbors shut the door or turned the corner, my father's smile morphed into a scowl. He barked orders and went inside to sleep another one off. But our work wasn't done. My brother Trunis Jr. and I had somewhere to be, and it was up to our sleepless mother to get us there. I was in first grade in 1981, and I was in a school daze, for real. Not because of the academics were hard, at least not yet, but because I couldn't stay awake. The teacher's sing-song voice was my lullaby. My crossed arms on my desk, a comfy pillow, and her sharp words once she caught me dreaming, an unwelcomed alarm clock that wouldn't stop blaring. Children that young are infinite sponges. They soak up language and ideas at warp speed to establish a fundamental foundation upon which most people build lifelong skills like reading and spelling and basic math. But because I worked nights, I couldn't concentrate on anything most mornings except trying to stay awake. Recess and PE were a whole different minefield. Out on the playground, staying lucid was the easy part. The hard part was hiding. Couldn't let my shirt slip. Couldn't wear shorts. Bruises were red flags. I couldn't show off because if I did, I knew I'd catch even more. Still, on that playground and in that classroom, I knew I was safe for a little while at least. It was the one place he couldn't reach me, at least not physically. My brother went through a similar dance in sixth grade, his first year in middle school. He had his own wounds to hide and sleep to harvest, because once that bell rang, real life began. The ride from Williamsville to the Maston district in East Buffalo took about an hour and a half, but it may as well have been a world away. Like much of East Buffalo, Maston was mostly Black working class neighborhood in the inner city that was rough around the edges. though in the early 1980s it was not yet completely ghetto as fuck. Back then, the Bethlehem steel plant was still humming, and Buffalo was the last great American steel town. Most men in the city, black and white, worked solid union jobs and earned a living wage, which meant business in Maston was good. For my dad, it always had been. By the time he was 20 years old, he owned a Coca-Cola distribution concession and four delivery routes in the Buffalo area. That's good money for a kid. But he had bigger dreams and an eye on the future. His future had four wheels and a disco funk soundtrack. When a local bakery shut down, he leased the building and built one of Buffalo's first roller skating rinks. Fast forward 10 years, and Skateland had been relocated to a building on Ferry Street that stretched nearly a full block in the heart of the Maston district. He opened a bar above the rink, which he named the Vermilion Room. In the 1970s, that was a place to be in East Buffalo, and it's where he met my mother when she was just 19 and he was 36. It was her first time away from home. Jackie grew up in a Catholic church. Trunis was the son of a minister and knew her language well enough to masquerade as a believer, which appealed to her. But let's keep it real, she was just as drunk on his charm. Trunis Jr. was born in 1971. I was born in 75. And by the time I was 6 years old, the roller disco craze was at its absolute peak. Skateland rocked every night. We'd usually get there by 5 p.m., and while my brother worked the concession stands, popping popcorn, grilling hot dogs, and loading the cooler and making pizzas, I organized the skates by size and style. Each afternoon, I stood on a step stool to spray my stock with aerosol deodorizer and replace the rubber stoppers. That aerosol stink would cloud all around my head and live in my nostrils. My eyes looked permanently bloodshot. It was the only thing I could smell for hours. But those were the distractions I had to ignore. Those are the distractions I had to ignore to stay organized and on the hustle. Because my dad, who worked the DJ booth, was always watching. And if any of those skates were missing, it meant my ass. Before the doors opened, I'd polish the skate rink floor with a dust mop that was twice my size. Before the doors opened, I'd polish the skate rink floor with a dust mop that was twice my size. At around 6 p.m., my mother called us to dinner in the back office. That woman lived in a permanent state of denial, but her maternal instinct was real, and it made a big fucking show for itself. Grasping for any shred of normalcy, every night in that office, she'd set out two electric burners on the floor, sit with her legs curled behind her, and prepare a full dinner, roast meat, potatoes, green beans, and dinner rolls, while my dad did the books and made calls. The food was good, but even at 6 and 7 years old, I knew our family dinner was a bullshit facsimile compared to what most families had. Plus, we ate fast. There was no time to enjoy it because at 7, when the doors opened, it was showtime, and we all had to be in our places with our stations prepped. My dad was the sheriff, and once he stepped into the DJ booth, he had us triangulated. He scanned the room like an all-seeing eye, and if you fucked up, you'd hear about it, unless you felt it first. The room didn't look like much under the harsh overhead lights, but once he dimmed them, the show lights bathed the rink in red and glanced off the spinning mirror ball, conjuring a skate disco fantasy. Weekend or weeknight, hundreds of skaters piled through the door. Most of the time, they came in as a family, paying their $3 entrance fee and $half skate fee before hitting the floor. I rented out skates and managed that entire station by myself. I carried that step stool around like a crutch. Without it, the customers couldn't even see me. The bigger size skates were down below the counter, but the smaller skates were stored so high I'd have to scale the shelves, which always made the customers laugh. Mom was the one and only cashier. She collected everyone's cover charge, and to Trunis, money was everything. He counted the people as they came in, calculating his take in real time, so he had a rough idea of what to expect when he counted out the register after we closed. And it had better all be there. All the money was his. The rest of us never earned a cent for our sweat. In fact, my mother was never given any money of her own. She had no bank account or credit cards in her name. He controlled everything, and we all knew what happened if her cash drawer ever came up short. None of the customers who came through our doors knew any of this, of course. To them, Skateland was a family owned and operated dream cloud. My dad spun the fading vinyl, echoes of disco and funk and the early rumbles of hip hop. Bass bounced off the red walls, courtesy of Buffalo's favorite son, Rick James, George Clinton's Funkadelic, and the first track ever released by hip hop innovators Run DMC. Some of the kids were speed skating. I like to go fast too, but we had our share of skate dancers, and that floor got funky. For the first hour or two, the parents stayed downstairs and skated or watched their kids spin the oval, but they would eventually leak upstairs to make their own scene. And when enough of them made their move, Truna slipped out of the DJ booth so he could join them. My dad was considered the unofficial mayor of Maston, and he was a phony politician to the core. His customers were his marks. And what they didn't know was no matter how many drinks he poured on the house and bros hugs he shared, he didn't give a fuck about any of them. They were all dollar signs to him. If he poured you a drink for free, it was because he knew you would buy two or three more. While we had our share of all night skates and 24-hour skate marathons, the Skateland doors typically closed at 10 p.m. That's when my mother, brother, and I would work to fishing bloody tampons out of shit-filled toilets, airing the lingering cannabis haze out of both bathrooms, scraping bacteria-loaded gum off the rink floor, cleaning the concession kitchen, and taking inventory. Just before midnight, we'd slodge into the office half dead. Our mother would tuck my brother and me beneath a blanket on the office sofa, our heads opposite to one another, as the ceiling shook with the sound of bass heavy funk. Mom was still on the clock. As soon as she stepped inside the bar, Trunis had her working the door or hustling downstairs like a booze mule to fetch cases of liquor from the basement. There was always some menial task to perform, and she didn't stop moving. While my father kept watch from his corner of the bar where he could take in the whole scene, while he could take in the whole scene. In those days, Rick James, a Buffalo native and one of my father's closest friends, stopped by whenever he was in town, parking his Excalibur on the sidewalk out front. His car was a billboard that let the hood know a super freak was in the house. He wasn't the only celebrity that came through. O.J. Simpson was one of the NFL's biggest stars, and he and his Buffalo Bills teammates were regulars, as Teddy Pendergrass and Sister Sledge. If you don't know those names, look them up. Maybe if I had been older or my father had been a good man, I might have had some pride in being part of a cultural moment like that. But young kids aren't about that life. It's almost like no matter who our parents are and what they do, we're all born with a moral compass that's properly tuned. When you're 6, 7, or 8, you know what feels right and what feels way the fuck off. And when you're born into a cyclone of terror and pain, you know it doesn't have to be that way. And the truth nags at you like a splinter in your jacked up mind. You can choose to ignore it, but the dull throbbing is always there as the days and nights bleed together into one blurred memory. Some moments do stick out, though, and one I'm thinking of right now still haunts me. That was the night my mom stepped into the bar before she was expected and found my dad sweet talking a woman about 10 years her junior. Truna saw her watching and shrugged while my mother eyeballed him and slugged 2 shots of Johnny Walker Red to calm her nerves. He noticed her reaction and didn't like it one damn bit. She knew how things were. that Trunis ran prostitutes across the border to Fort Erie in Canada. A summer cottage belonging to the president of one of Buffalo's biggest banks doubled as his pop-up brothel. He introduced Buffalo bankers to his girls whenever he needed a longer line of credit, and those loans always came through. My mom knew the young women she was watching was one of the girls in his stable. She'd seen her before. Once she walked in on them fucking on the Skateland office sofa, where she tucked her children in damn near every night. When she found them together, the woman smiled at her. Trina shrugged. No, my mom wasn't clueless, but seeing it with her own eyes always burned. Around midnight, my mother drove with one of our security guards to make a bank deposit. He begged her to leave my father. He told her to leave that very night. Maybe he knew what was coming. She did too. But she couldn't run because she had no independent means whatsoever, and she wasn't going to leave us in his hands. Plus, she had no rights to community property because Trunis had always refused to marry her, which is a riddle she was only then starting to solve. My mother came from a solid middle class family and had always been the virtuous type. He resented that, treated his hookers better than the mother of his sons. And as a result, he had her trapped. She was 100% dependent, and if she wanted to leave, she'd have to walk with nothing at all. My brother and I had never slept well at Skateland. The ceiling shook too much because the office was directly below the dance floor. When my mother walked in that night, I was already awake. She smiled, but I noticed the tears in her eyes and remember smelling the scotch on her breath when she scooped me up in her arms as tenderly as she could. My father trailed in after her, sloppy and annoyed. He pulled a pistol from beneath the cushion where I slept. Yes, you read that right. There was a loaded gun under the cushion on which I slept at 6 years old. Flashed it at me and smiled before concealing it beneath his pant leg in an ankle holster. In his other hand were two brown paper shopping bags filled with nearly $10,000 cash. So far, it was a typical night. My parents didn't speak on the drive home, though the tension between them simmered. My mom pulled into the driveway on Paradise Road just before 6 a.m., a little early by our standards. Trunis stumbled from the car, disabled the alarm, dropped the cash on the kitchen table, and went upstairs. We followed him, and she tucked us both into our beds, kissed me on my forehead, and turned out the light before slipping into the master suite where she found him waiting, stroking his leather belt. Trunis didn't appreciate being glared at by my mom, especially in public. This belt came all the way from Texas just to whip you, he said calmly. Then he started swinging it, buckle first. Sometimes my mother fought back, and she did that night. She threw a marble candlestick at his head. He ducked, and it thudded the wall. She ran into the bathroom, locked the door, and cowered on the toilet. He kicked the door down and backhanded her, and her head slammed into the wall. She was barely conscious when he grabbed a fistful of her hair and dragged her down the hall. By then, my brother and I had heard the violence, and we watched him drag her all the way down the stairs to the first floor, then crouch over her with the belt in his hand. She was bleeding from the temple and her lip, and the sight of her blood lit a fuse in me. In that moment, my hatred overcame my fear. I ran downstairs and jumped on his back, slammed my tiny fist into his back, and scratched at his eyes. I caught him off guard and he fell to one knee. I wailed on him. Don't hit my mom, I yelled. He tossed me to the ground, stalked toward me, belt in hand, and then turned toward my mother. You're raising a gangster, he said, half smiling. I curled into a ball when he started swinging his belt at me. I could feel bruises rise on my back as my mom crawled toward the control pad near the front door. She pressed the panic button and the house exploded in alarm. He froze, looked toward the ceiling, mopped his brow with his sleeve, took a deep breath, looped his belt buckle, and went upstairs to wash off that evil and hate. Police were on their way. and he knew it. My mother's relief was short lived. When the cops arrived, Trunis met them at the door. They looked over his shoulder toward my mom, who stood several paces. They looked over his shoulder toward my mom, who stood paces behind him, her face swollen and caked with dried blood. But those were different days. There was no Me Too back then. That shit didn't exist, and they ignored her. Trunis told them it was all a whole lot of nothing, just some necessary domestic discipline. Look at this house. Does it look like I mistreat my wife? He asked. I give her mink coats, diamond rings. I bust my ass to give her everything she wants, and she throws a marble candlestick at my head. She's spoiled. The police chuckled along with my father as he walked them to their car. They left without interviewing her. He didn't hit her against that. He didn't hit her again that morning. He didn't have to. The psychological damage was done. From that point on, it was clear to us that as far as Trunis and the law were concerned, it was open season, and we were the hunted. Over the next year, our schedule didn't change much. The beatings continued while my mother tried to paper over the darkness with swatches of light. She knew I wanted to be a scout, so she signed me up for a local troop. I still remember putting on that navy blue Cub Scouts button down one Saturday. I felt proud wearing a uniform and knowing, at least for a few hours, I could pretend that I was a normal kid. My mom smiled as we headed for the door. My pride, her smile, wasn't just because of the damn Cub Scouts. My pride, her smile, wasn't just because of the damn Cub Scouts. They rose up from a deeper place. We were taking action to find something positive for ourselves in a bleak situation. It was proof that we mattered and that we weren't completely powerless. That's when my father came home from the Vermilion Room, that's when my father came home from the Vermilion Room. Where you two going? He glared at me. I stared at the floor. My mother cleared her throat. I'm taking David to his first Cub Scout meeting, she said softly. The hell you are! I looked up and he laughed as my eyes welled up with tears. We're going to the track. Within the hour, we arrived at Botvia Downs, an old high school harness horse track, the type where jockeys ride behind the horses in lightweight buggies. My dad grabbed a racing form as soon as we stepped through the gate. For hours, the three of us watched him place bet after bet, chain smoke, drink scotch, and raise holy hell as every pony he bet on finished out of the money. With my dad raging at the gambling gods and acting a fool, I tried to make myself as small as possible. Whenever people walked by, but I still stuck out. Let me read that again. With my dad raging at the gambling gods and acting a fool, I tried to make myself as small as possible whenever people walked by, but I still stuck out. I was the only kid in the stands dressed like a Cub Scout. I was probably the only black Cub Scout they'd ever seen, and my uniform was a lie. I was a pretender. Trunis lost thousands of dollars that day, and he wouldn't shut up about it on the drive home. His raspy throat raw from nicotine. My brother and I in the cramped back seat, and my brother and I were in the cramped back seat, and whenever he spat out the window, his phlegm boomeranged into my face. Each drop of his nasty saliva on my skin burned like venom and intensified my hate. I'd long since learned that the best way to avoid a beatdown was to make myself as invisible as possible, avert my eyes, float outside my body, and hope to go unnoticed. It was a practice we'd all honed over the years. It was a practice we'd all honed over the years, but I was done with that shit. I would no longer hide from the devil. That afternoon, as he veered into the highway and headed home, he continued to rave on, and I mag-dogged him from the back seat. Have you ever heard the phrase, faith over fear? For me, it was hate over fear. He caught my eyes in the rearview mirror. You got something to say? We shouldn't have gone to the track anyway, I said. My brother turned and stared at me like I'd lost my damn mind. My mother squirmed in her seat. Say that one more time. His words came slow, dripping with dread. I didn't say a word. So he started reaching behind the seat, trying to smack me. But I was so small, it was easy to hide. The car veered left and right as he was half turned in my direction, punching air. He barely touched me, which was only a stroke of his fire, only stoked his fire. He barely touched me, which only stoked his fire. We drove in silence until he caught his breath. When we got home, when we get home, you're gonna take your clothes off, he said. That's what he said. That's what he'd say when he was ready to bestow a serious That's what he'd say when he was ready to bestow a serious beatdown, and there was no avoiding it. I did what I was told. I went into my bedroom and took off my clothes, walked down the hall to his room, closed the door behind me, turned the lights off, then laid across the corner of my bed with my legs dangling, my torso stretched out in front of me, and my ass exposed. That was the protocol, and he designed it for maximum psychological and physical pain. The beatings were often brutal, but the anticipation was the worst part. I could see the door behind me, and he'd take his time, letting my dread build. When I heard him open the door, my panic spiked. Even then, the room was so dark I couldn't see much with my peripheral vision and couldn't prepare for the first smack until his belt hit my skin. It was never just 2 or 3 lickings either. There was no particular count, so we never knew when or if he was going to stop. This beating lasted minutes upon minutes. He started on my butt, but the sting was so bad I blocked it with my hands, so he moved down and started whipping my thighs. When I dropped my hands to my thighs, he swung at my lower back. He belted me dozens of times and was breathless, coughing and slick with sweat by the time it was over. I was breathing heavy too, but I wasn't crying. His evil was too real, and my hate gave me courage. I refused to give that motherfucker the satisfaction. I just stood up, looked the devil in his eye, limped to my room, and stood in front of a mirror. I was covered in welts from my neck to the crease of my knees. I didn't go to school for several days. When you're getting beat consistently, hope evaporates. You stifle your emotions, but your trauma off gases in unconscious ways. After countless beatings she endured and witnessed, this particular beatdown left my mother in a constant fog, a shell of the woman I remembered from a few years before. She was distracted and vacant most of the time, except when he called her name. Then she'd hop to then she'd hop too, like she was his slave. I didn't know until years later that she was considering suicide. My brother and I took our pain out on each other. We'd sit or stand across from one another, and he would throw punches as hard as he could at me. It usually started out as a game, but he was 4 years older, much stronger, and he connected with all his power. Whenever I'd fall, I'd get up and he'd hit me again as hard as he could, yelling like a arts warrior at the top of his lungs, his fist twisted with rage. "You're hurting me. Is that all you fucking have?" I'd shout back. I wanted him to know that I could take more pain than he could ever deliver. But when it was time to fall asleep and there were no battles to fight, no place to hide, I wet the bed nearly every night. My mother's every day was a lesson in survival. She was told she was worthless, so often she started to believe it. Everything she did was an effort to appease him so he wouldn't beat her sons or whoop her ass. But there were invisible tripwires in her world, and sometimes she never knew when or how she set them off until after he slapped the shit out of her. Other times she knew she teed herself up for a vicious beatdown. Other times she knew she teed herself up for a vicious beatdown. One day, I came home early from school with a nasty earache, and I laid down on my mother's side of their bed, my left ear throbbing in excruciating pain. With each throb, my hate spiked. I knew I wouldn't be going to the doctor because my father didn't approve of spending his money on doctors or dentists. If we got injured or sick, we were told to shake it off because he wasn't down to pay for anything that didn't directly benefit Trunis Goggins. Our health didn't meet that standard, and that pissed me the fuck off. After about an hour, half an hour, my mother came upstairs to check on me, and when I rolled onto my back, she could see blood dripping down the side of my neck and smeared all over the pillow. "That's it," she said. "Come with me." She got me out of bed, dressed me, and helped me to her car. But before she could start the engine, my dad chased us down. "Where you think you going?" "The emergency room," she said as she turned the ignition. He reached for the handle, but she peeled out first, leaving him in her dust. Furious, he stomped inside, slammed the door, and called out to my brother, "Son, get me a Johnny Walker." Trunis Jr. brought over a bottle of Red Label. Trunis Jr. brought over a bottle of Red Label and a glass from the wet bar. He poured and watched my dad down shot after shot, each one fueled with inferno. "You and David need to be strong," he raved. "I'm not raising a bunch of faggots. And that's what you'll be if you go to the doctor every time you get a little boo-boo. You understand?" My brother nodded, petrified. "Your last name is Goggins, and we shake it off." According to the doctor we saw that night, my mother got me to the ER just in time. My ear infection was so bad that if we'd waited any longer, I would have lost my hearing in my left ear for life. She risked her ass to save mine, and we both knew she'd pay for it. We drove home in eerie silence. My dad was stewing at the kitchen table by the time we turned onto Paradise Road, and my brother was still pouring him shots. Trunis Jr. feared our father, but he also worshipped the man and was under his spell. As the firstborn son, he was treated better. Trunis would still lash out at him, but in his warped mind, Trunis Jr. was his prince. "When you grow up, I'm going to want to see you be the man of your house," Trunis told him, "and you're going to see me be a man tonight." Moments after we walked through the door, Trunis beat our mother senseless, but my brother couldn't watch. Whenever the beatings exploded like a thunderstorm from overhead, he'd wait them out in his room. He ignored the darkness because the truth was too heavy for him to carry. I always paid close fucking attention. During the summers, there was no mid-week respite for Trunis, but my brother and I learned to hop on our bikes and stay far away for as long as we could. One day I came home for lunch and entered the house through the garage like normal. My father usually slept deep into the afternoon, so I figured the coast was clear. I was wrong. My father was paranoid. He did enough shady deals to attract some enemies, and he'd set the alarm after we left the house. When I opened the door, sirens screamed, and my stomach dropped. I froze, backed up against the wall, and listened for the footsteps. I heard the stairs creak and knew I was fucked. He came downstairs in his brown terry cloth robe, pistol in hand, and crossed from the dining room into the living room, his gun out front. I could see the barrel come around the corner slowly. As soon as he cleared the corner, he could see me standing just 20 feet away. But he didn't drop his weapon. He aimed it right between my eyes. I stared at him, blank as possible, my feet anchored to the floorboards. There was no one else in the house, and a part of me expected him to pull the trigger. But by this time in my life, I no longer cared if I lived or died. I was an exhausted 8-year-old kid, plain old fucking tired of being terrified of my father. And I was sick of Skateland too. After a minute or two, he lowered his weapon and went back upstairs. By now, it was becoming clear that someone was going to die on Paradise Road. My mother knew where Trunis kept his 38. Some days she timed and followed him, envisioned how it would be and how it would play out. They'd take separate cars to Skateland. She'd grab his gun from beneath the office sofa cushion before he could get there, bring us home early, put us to bed, and wait for him by the front door with his gun in hand. When he pulled up, she'd step out the front door and murder him in his driveway, leave his body for the milkman to find. My uncles, her brothers, talked her out of it, but they agreed she needed to do something drastic or she'd be the one lying dead. It was an old neighbor who showed her a way. Betty used to live across the street. the street from us. Betty used to live across the street from us, and after she moved, they stayed in touch. Betty was 20 years older than my mom and had the wisdom to match. She encouraged my mother to plan her escape weeks in advance. The first step was getting a credit card in her name. That meant she had to re earn Truna's trust because she needed him to co sign. Betty also reminded my mother to keep their friendship a secret. For a few weeks, Jackie played Trunas, treating him like she did when she was 19 years old, when she was a 19-year-old beauty with stars in her eyes. She made him believe she worshiped him again. And when she slipped a credit card application in front of him, he said he'd be happy to score her a little buying power. When the card arrived in the mail, my mother felt its hard plastic edge through the envelope as relief saturated her mind. She held it at her arm's length and admired it. It glowed like a golden ticket. A few days later, she heard my father talking shit about her on the phone to one of his friends while he was having breakfast with my brother and me at the table. That did it. She walked over to the table and said, "I'm leaving your father. You two can stay or you can come with me." My dad was stunned, silent, and so was my brother. But I shot out of that chair like it was on fire, grabbed a few of my black garbage bags, I grabbed a few black garbage bags and went upstairs to start packing. My brother eventually started gathering his things too. Before we left, the four of us had one last powwow at the kitchen table. Trunas glaring at my mother, filled with shock and contempt. "You have nothing. You are nothing to me," he said. You are uneducated. You don't have any money or prospects. You'll be a prostitute inside a year. He paused, then shifted his focus to my brother and me. "You two are going to grow up to be a couple of faggots. And don't think about coming back, Jackie. I'll have another woman here to take your place 5 minutes after you leave." She nodded and stood. She'd given him her youth, her very soul, and she was finally finished. She packed as little of her past as possible. She left the mink coats and the diamond rings. He could give them to his new whore girlfriend as far as she was concerned. Trunas watched us load up into my mom's Volvo, the one vehicle he owned that he wouldn't ride in. Our bikes already strapped to the back, we drove off slowly, and at first he didn't budge. But before she turned the corner, I could see him move toward the garage. My mother floored it. Give her credit. She'd planned for contingencies. She figured he'd tail her, so she didn't head west into. She didn't give her credit. She planned for contingencies. She figured he'd tail her, so he didn't head west. So she didn't head west to the interstate that would take us to her parents' place in Indiana. Instead, she drove to Betty's house down a dirt construction road that my dad didn't even know about. Betty had the garage door open when we arrived. We pulled in. Betty yanked the door down, and while my father shot out the driveway in his Corvette to chase after us, we waited right under his nose until just before nightfall. By then, we knew he'd be at Skateland, opening up. He wasn't going to miss a chance to make some money no matter what. Shit went wrong about 90 miles outside of Buffalo when the old Volvo started burning oil. Huge plumes of inky exhaust choked from the tailpipe, and my mother spun into panic mode. It was as if she'd been holding it all in, stuffing her fear down deep, hiding it beneath a mask of forced composure until an obstacle emerged and she fell apart. Tears streaked her face. What do I do?" my mom asked, her eyes wide as saucers. My brother never wanted to leave, and he told her to turn around. I was riding shotgun. She looked over expectantly. "What do I do?" "We gotta go, Mom," I said. "Mom, we gotta go." She pulled into a gas station into the middle of nowhere, hysterical. She rushed to a payphone and called Betty. "I can't do this, Betty," she said. "The car broke down. I have to go back." "Where are you?" Betty asked calmly. "I don't know," my mom replied. "I have no idea where I am." Betty told her to find a gas station attendant. Every station had them back then, and put him on the phone. He explained we were outside of Erie, Pennsylvania, And after Betty gave him some instructions, he put my mother back on the line. Jackie, there's a Volvo dealer in Erie. Find a hotel tonight and take the car there tomorrow. The attendant is going to put enough oil in that car to get you there. My mother was listening, but she didn't respond. Jackie, are you hearing me? Do what I say and it will be okay. Yeah, okay, she whispered, emotionally spent. Hotel, Volvo dealer, got it. I don't know what Erie is like now, but back then there was only one decent hotel in town, a Holiday Inn, not far from the Volvo dealership. My brother and I followed my mom to the reception desk where we were hit with more bad news. They were fully booked. My mother's shoulders slumped. My brother and I stood on either side of her, holding our clothes in black trash bags. My mother's shoulders slumped. My brother and I stood on either side of her, holding our clothes in black trash bags. We were the picture of desperation, and that night the manager saw it. Look, I'll set you up with some rollaway beds in the conference room, he said. There's a bathroom down there, but you have to be out early because we have a conference starting at 9 a.m. Grateful, we bedded down in that conference room with its industrial carpet and fluorescent lights, our own personal purgatory. We were on the run and on the ropes, but my mother hadn't folded. She laid back and stared at the ceiling tiles until we nodded off. Then she slipped into an adjacent coffee shop to keep an anxious eye on our bikes and on the road. All night long, and on the road all night long. We were waiting outside that Volvo dealership when the garage opened, which gave the mechanics just enough time to source the part we needed and get us back on the road before their day was done. We left Erie at sunset and drove all night, arriving at my grandparents' house in Brazil, Indiana, 8 hours later. My mom wept as she parked next to their old wooden house before the dawn, and I understood why. Our arrival felt significant then and now. I was still only 8 years old, but already in a second phase of life. I didn't know what awaited me, what awaited us in that small, rural, southern Indiana town, and I didn't much care. All I knew was that I'd escaped from hell, and for the first time in my life, we were free from the devil himself. That is chapter 1, part 1. I will continue the rest of it. It's definitely a story to stay patient with, and the good part is coming. It's definitely very, very transparent, and it's a raw story. And he's laying the foundation to show you how broken he was and how he builds himself back up. So I hope you join me for the rest of the book. Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. Master your mind and defy the odds. Thank you if you made it to this part of the video, the end. I appreciate you, and until next time, with love, Misty.